Tu te marae, ko Ngāti Kahu nā koe te iwi, tēnā koutou katoa. So kia ora whānau, let's hit the slides, and what I'm thinking of doing is, as I'm having a kōrero with you, by all means throw out your questions. I know that there's going to be a kōrero later on, but sometimes our whānau get a bit shy. So a little bit about me, so ko waio. So my background is a health professional. I work as a dual diagnosis clinician, which is just a fancy word for saying that I help our whānau with mental health and addiction issues, because they go hand in hand. But I also work as a rural practitioner. I just recently resigned to the fact that I'm going to need to be registered with ACC, so I've been running a free counselling service now for close to 15 years to support our Tane that have been affected by sexual violence. I've worked with over 4,500 Māori and Pacific men for almost 20 years across the rohe, so from Hokianga all the way down to Te Miru. And I also train our health professionals on how to engage with our whānau. I also run a mentoring service, so at the moment I've got 3 Tane that want to come into this space, and that in itself has its own wero. How do we support more Tane to kind of work in a space that, it's kind of in the realm of pūmātau, which I talk about later on. But I've got Ira, who's at my cultural advisor, who's sitting right there. Do a big wave out, Ira. Yep, kia ora. Then we've got Caleb, who's up in Pokekauhi, and then I've got our doko Sione as well. So a little bit about me, whānau. So if we go 6 generations ago, on my Pākehā side, I come from Samuel Marsden, so he was the first missionary that arrived up in Northland, and I also whakapapa to Tamati Wakanenea, who also has a background as being a tohunga. So I always feel conflicted around these 2 opposing whakapapa that both sought to support, albeit our Northland whānau, but had very different ways about implementing way forward, especially in the realm of Wairoa. When I think about the mahi that we do and the reasons that we hear, I centre our whakaaro in the realm of te kore, in the space of chaos, because that is where a lot of our Tane see themselves. It's chaotic, it's hard mahi, and to be honest with you, it actually explains, if you think about the realm of te kore, it explains why we have a lot of our Tane with mental health addictions, who are feeling suicidal, who are feeling ostracised, away from everything else, disconnected. There is a way forward, but I'm very clear that our whakapapa, our pūrākau, our stories tell of where we are positioned. So this is where I believe that our men are at the moment. I'm going to share with you one of the beautiful things about being Māori is that our pūrākau, although different from rohi to rohi, do have similarities. So I'm going to share with you a story that I collected as part of my PhD going across the motu and talking about the origins. So one of the things that our whānau talk about is that we don't talk about sexual abuse. We don't talk about it. It's tapu. It's nothing, it's in the realm of silence. I challenge that, and I say to our whānau that our stories pre my great-great-grandfather arriving actually talked about it. It wasn't called sexual abuse, but we talked about it, and I'm going to share that with you right now. So for nearly all of you, I would imagine, you're aware that we have that beautiful whakaaro around Papatūānuku and Ranginui coming together in unity, and then separating themselves out as Tane Mahuta. However, across different iwi, we tell a different story. This is what I'm going to share with you now. So Ranginui Skyfather, if you go to the next slide, was in love with Papatūānuku. Our Tūhoi whānau say that Tongaroa was actually before Ranginui, right? And then while he went out, Ranginui kind of did his thing, right, and came and fell in love with Papatūānuku. So I just want to acknowledge that whakaaro. But from a Northland perspective, we talk about the connection between Papatūānuku and Ranginui coming together in a union. And in those unions, that's where our Tane, our atua Tane were born. Tane in particular wanted separation. He wanted the ability to have freedom, to be able to do what he needed to do without the close confinement of his parents. And so he had conspired with the rest of his siblings, if we go to the next slide, conspired with his siblings to separate the parents out. So we talk about this in schools, right? Tāwhiri Mātia was the only atua at the time, which was There's the ato talking. Step away. Yep, Tāwhiri Mātia was the only ato who said, actually, this is not okay. How dare you even think about separating papa and rangi? And to do so is a takahi on their mana. As a result, a huge war broke out, and Tane could not take on Tāwhiri Mātia by himself, and so he called upon his brother Tūmā Tauinga to go head to head. And in that process, they kept coming to a stalemate, and so in the end, Tane called out to Tūmā Tauinga to use his 2 axes, and decided that because he could not separate his parents by himself, he was going to ask somebody else to help him. So the more that Tane tried to separate his parents out, the more that Ranginui locked his ure into Papa Tuanuku to hold them in place. Tūmā Tauinga separated the two by using his axes and chopping off the ure of Ranginui, which isn't talked about in schools, right? Just being clear about this, but that's the whakaaro that's often said across the iwi. And so in that process, if we go to the next slide, well, when you think of rongo, it's not only the atua of the harvest, but rongo is also the atua of time and space, because there is time and space for things to grow and develop. So as that separation occurred, the siblings saw the damage that they had caused to Ranginui and to Papa, and that damage could not only be seen, but there were consequences that lingered long afterwards. So Tāwhiri Mātia, in a rage, and we talked about this in Matariki not so long ago, Tāwhiri Mātia, in a rage, swore revenge against his brothers through storms to punish them for the trauma and the hurt that had been caused. Next slide. And so many of you, depending on the whakaaro that you hear, he ripped his eyes out and threw them up in the air. And one of the things that I talk about is that, you know, that whakaaro doesn't often link, but it does explain why he would be so egregious or so angry as he threw his eyes up in the air and then said, "My children and I will watch over you, your actions." And if we think about that stuff around being affected by sexual abuse, it falls within the same kind of whakaaro. Next slide. So the power of pūrākau is this, that when we think about the separation of our tūpuna, especially our rangi and papa, te kore is always in the centre, and the gaps to support our Tane is very different to supporting our wahine. And the gap for me is quite significant, to the point where it is chaotic for our Tane to find appropriate help. Can we go to the next slide? The reality is, whānau, is that most abuse is caused by our whānau, and having worked across the country again, more often than not, their story doesn't come forward until during a tangihanga process where someone will speak out. So one of the questions that comes up is, how do we support our whānau who have caused this mamai, who have caused this takahi against our whānau? One of the things I'd like to throw out to you is Tāwhiri Mātia, from my perspective, could also be seen as the very first support person for his parents, in that he said, you know, by him advocating, by him saying enough is enough, you know, demonstrating that actually that whakaaro still flows on even now, right? Next slide, please. The other thing to think about when we contemplate the realm of Ranginui and Papa Tuanuku, can you just do the next slide? Is that in their last act, so when Rangi locked his ure into Papa before they separated, one last child was born, which was Rumoku, who in the act got stuck within the wharitangata of Papa Tuanuku and became trapped, and thus became the atua of earthquakes, among other things. So what we know is that our pepes, in terms of whakapapa, can flow on if we don't deal and attend to the mamai that occurred before. So, as a result, it's often said that the red in the sky was a reminder to our people of the damage done to Rangi's ure, and that the red of the sky was a reminder that you got your freedom, but that it came at a cost. and that for Ranginui's perspective, even though he's separated from Papa, he still grieves the connection, with his children and with his partner. So, often on my Pākehā side, we talk about I read at night shepherd's delight, but for me, I look at the sky and think of that reminder in terms of it, that separation came at a cost. And that our whānau did talk about sexual abuse, but not necessarily named it as such. As I said before, the whare tangata, Te Papa Tūnuku, had also been severely damaged. So as the light came through, Tamanui Te Rā, as the light came through, the children saw the damage caused. This is also, for many of our iwi, the whakapapa of the period and the connection to our wahine. And so, for whānau who had saw the red earth, the red clay, this is what they associated with it. Can I also say to whānau, I'm kind of doing the speed version of this one. Normally it's a whole one day wānanga confined into a wā of 30 minutes, so, yeah. Whānau, I also want to be clear about this. If you look at our pūrākau, in between, so as Rangi wept for being separated out from Papa, and Papa returned as mist, a rainbow formed, and in that rainbow is where our takatāpoi, our LGBT, our rainbow community is centred, so a rainbow was formed. And often I'm asked whereabout is our rainbow whānau situated within our kaupapa Māori. So what I say to our whānau is you can be e re Tane, you could be the masculine form, but your wairua in Māori, if you're Tane, could be more connected to Papa Tūnuku. It's the same deal with our wahine. You might be e re wahine, and yet your wairua or Māori might be more connected to Ranginui. But paiana, right? So what I'm saying is you fit within that realm. The other lesson that comes from this pūrākau, if we go to the next slide, that's just me to show my artwork. Okay, then the next slide looks at our tangata whaikaha, our whānau who have disabilities. Because of the damage done to Rangi and Papa, the physical impairments, right? You could also situate our tangata whaikaha, those who actively seek to overcome challenges, are also positioned between the realm of our ancestors as well. So what I'm saying to you is because we know that our takatāpoi and our tangata whaikaha have huge rates of being affected by sexual abuse, and just recently I think it's something like close to 70% of our whānau who have some kind of disability are often traumatised by sexual abuse. We need to be mindful of also where their story is and where they fit within our kaupapa as well. Okay, whānau, so how are we tracking? 10 minutes? 5? Huh? Okay, cool. Alright, whānau, so this is 37 seconds or minutes?
37 minutes.
Oh yeah, ka pai. Alright, whānau, look, I'm just going to breeze through this as best as possible. So when you think about the realm of Ranginui and our Tane that have been affected by sexual abuse, as part of my PhD research, these are the questions that came up. So having interviewed close to 200 people, the number one question that our Tane asked, irrespective of where they fit within that spectrum of masculinity, was why me? Out of all the people in the world, why was it me that was targeted? And the answer is, there is no answer really. Unfortunately, the way that we understand working with whānau who deliberately cause harm is complex. And there isn't a straightforward answer. One of the things that I do as a Rongoa practitioner is actually work with you, kānohi te kānohi, and actually figure it out. So I'm always mindful that there isn't a straightforward answer. Yeah, it's as individual as your fingerprint. Can we do the next slide for a second? So we thought about this one. Yep, so we know that there's a lot of damage caused, so how do we find a way forward? The next two questions I'm going to answer. So how do I let someone know what happened and where can I get help? So if we go to the next slide, what the research showed is that our Tane are much more likely to let somebody else know in a car, often driving, and either being a driver or a passenger. In fact, having worked with, like I said, close to 5,000 Tane, a lot of them had told either their wahine or their mate driving, A few of them also did it through the McDonald's drive-through as well. Apparently they found that that was the most appropriate moment to kind of let whānau know this is what happened. That research isn't even up yet, but for me, I'm interested to know what creates that whenua where you can actually come forward and think, actually, this is the time and space to let someone know. If we think about working with those who have committed the offence, these are the two questions that I get hit with all the time. Why do men offend? Can I be clear with you? So yes, whānau, for those of you who like to do a bit of reading, there is lots of research that says that our men are offenders, and yet I also know that for many of our men, our wahine are also offenders as well, but that's not a whakaaro that's often spoken about. And the other question that I get is, can offenders, or whānau, right? Because ultimately, can they be cured? And the answer is that there are programs available, and I'd like to think that ahwai can be found. All right, and what about our support people? So for our support people, that was actually kind of an interesting space as well. So if you looked at the top 3 questions, which we're going to see right now, it's, my bro has told me that he's been sexually abused, what do I do? So I say to our whānau, the number one thing you can do is just believe them. If they've told you that they've been abused, it's a sacred opportunity to hold their mauri and wairua in place. Do I let someone know what happened? Can we just do the next slide for a second? So, paeana. So, a bro's told you they've been sexually abused. There's 4 key things, right? So respect what they're saying, don't panic. Apply aroha, validate that you hear them, which I know sounds a little bit kind of very Pākehā medicine, but actually just letting them know, hey, that you hear and see them. But also know your limits. So, we don't expect you to go in there and do a Dr. Phil and start to help them to get well, but we also know that just letting them be seen and heard is incredibly powerful. Because actually there are 3 key moments with our Tane that they'll come forward. It's the ages between 5 and 8. And if they're not believed then they'll come forward in their mid-20s, often because they found out that they're going to be a dad. And if they're not believed then they'll often come forward in their late 60s and 70s, and often on their deathbeds. Okay, next slide. So a lot of our bros, I always say that they always feel like they're in war, and that's exactly what it is, because they are in the realm of tūmatoenga, wanting to be seen, wanting to be heard, and often having to fight systems that don't support our Tane to get help. So working with our Tane is a specialised skill, whānau, but ultimately we can all do our part, because our tikanga actually provides us the roadmap forward. And if you, like me, are overdosed with that song of Te Aroha, actually that whole approach though is a beautiful example forward. But I do think we need to do more research, so sometimes our whānau kind of give me the stink eye and say, why? Because sometimes we have to argue with our Pākehā counterparts, which is the other mahi that I do. I think we're almost near the end. So that's my website, people. So if you go onto standingtallnz.org, you'll be taken to this on your laptops. Otherwise, you'll see our emo tiki that will come up on a mobile phone just to let you know that you've reached the right site. And that's it, I think. What's the next slide, Cody? Yep, that's it. So that's me, whānau, nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa.